Welcome to LaxRatsTV. We're doing a new format, so we're gonna start doing one weekly podcast episode on Wednesdays called "The State of Lax." It's sort of gonna be a combination of the two shorter episodes a week, and do sort of a longer form episode. Hopefully, that also gives you space to talk about things outside of just the PLL weekly matchups. Obviously, with the state of lacrosse being a growing sport and the PLL being a growing league, there's so many other things to talk about, and I just hope this gives me the space to be able to discuss them and have discourse with you guys about them. So let's get right into it. This is State of Lax episode 1. Let's just start off with the power rankings. Last week, if anything, was a reminder on how much parity there is in the PLL. We've got the Cannons have 3 wins and the Chaos have 1 win. And then there's 6 teams in the middle with 2 wins, which is absolutely insane. You don't see that in really any sport, it feels like, outside of lacrosse. I think that comes with how small the league is. Obviously, there's just so much talent on every team. It really just comes down to who's going to show up each week, who's more prepared, and just who can execute their game plan better. Bottom teams can beat top teams if they execute. Just because the skill gap really is not big between any of these teams. But let's start out. Thank you if you voted on our Instagram poll. Most people voted the Cannons to be the number 1 team in this week's power rankings, and I totally agree. They're the only team with 3 wins, which is essentially what made this pretty easy. Obviously, we had the Water Dogs at 1, but they just suffered 2 losses in a row, so they dropped quite a bit. But we have the Cannons at 1. Obviously, the only team with 3 wins. Their wins against Utah, New York, and Maryland, and their only loss is Philly. Obviously, those are 3 good wins. All 3 of those teams are competing, for playoffs and everything. Utah and New York, specifically, are off the chart. Obviously, that's a back-to-back championship team in Utah. New York, like we talk about, they're a different team every single week. You don't really know what you're going to get, but I think, for my money, it's the most talented team in the league. Philly, on the other hand, 2 losses in a row, but, when Boston was playing them, that was, them coming off of their week 1 bye. They were kind of an unknown, and they just completely jumped on the scene, and they were red hot to start. That's a good loss in my mind. The Cannons really are the only team that I think what you're going to get week in and week out. Something that's really exciting about this team for me too is the Nolting to Mackesy connection. We saw that happen. I think it was Coulter has back-to-back hat tricks, and I think this last week all 3 of his goals were assisted by Nolting. This is exactly what I wanted to see from this team: is Nolting drawing doubles, dishing to a lefty shooter like Coulter. It's what this team was missing, and as a Cannons fan, it's pretty exciting to watch it go down. Coming from the Mitchell Pelkey Lacrosse show, Kev Boylard he said Mackesy needs to be more of a Dodger if this team wants to, really be a contender. And obviously that would be great if Colt can start, creating offense as well as finishing offense. But I don't think that's his role in this team right now. I think right now this team, I think Kevin was completely overlooking the midfield. I think the Cannons might have the best dodging midfield in the league right now. Matt Campbell is up there with Brian Costiville right now for the best dodging middies in the league and just the best overall middies in the league. And then you have Mick Kelly, who's an absolute stud, and he's a one-on-one nightmare. I think Kev was sleeping on the Cannons midfield a little bit. This midfield, I think Coulter, it fits like a glove in his lefty wing shooter spot. I think Nolting as a Dodger and an initiator behind the net, and then those midfielders as initiators above the net, is a really good, it's a really cohesive offense with good flow. I don't think they should be looking to change anything up like crazy. Obviously, they've been, like we said, the most consistent team in the league, and they're putting up plenty of goals each week for the most part. So I don't know. I think this offense, when they're humming, they're humming. I think, with Holman and Mackesy in their shooting spots, I don't think we need to ask them to do much more. I don't know if that's their role. I think the rest of it comes from the middies being Dodgers and Nolting being a Dodger below the cage. Number 2 in the rankings, we have the Utah Archers at 2-2. A little crazy. Last week they were 3 in my rankings, and they jumped up to 2 after a loss to Denver. But hear me out a little bit. It was like they have a one goal, like out of their 2 losses, it's a 1-goal loss to Boston, who's the number 1 team in the league right now. The other loss was this week to Denver. I was a little upset because I was watching this game, and I'm a Utah fan. They've got a lot of Princeton Tigers on that team. They were balling. They were playing better lacrosse, it felt like, the whole game, and they just completely ran out of steam in the heat. I think ultimately, like, Utah is a better lacrosse team than Denver, even though Denver got them on that one. I think Utah wins that matchup 7 out of 10 times. That just happened to be one of the 3 times that Utah would lose that game. But they're just another one of those teams that's consistent. You know what you're going to get out of them week in and week out, specifically from the defensive end. So I think it's tough for them not to be in, have a case to be the top team in the league. I think ultimately that loss, they're obviously not going to be number 1, and they lost to Boston, so they're obviously not going to be above Boston, who's the clear favorite right now. But I think they fit right in at 2. This week they've got a good matchup against the Atlas. I think that could be the game of the week. Like, keep your eyes, like, that's going to be a fun game to watch. You have the Atlas with the talent they have on the offensive end of the field, and Utah with their defense, and who I think right now is the best defensive player in the league in Graham Hossack. It's going to be a good matchup. California at 3, at 2-1. I really wanted to put them at 2 this week. I absolutely love this team, and they're fun to watch, but they did lose to Utah in a good game that I think both teams played like their brand of lacrosse. They played a good brand of, like, a good lacrosse game all around. And Utah just edged them out by 1. This team, they have absolutely blown away my expectations for what they were going to do this year. We can look at, so if we look at their record, 2-1, they beat 2 of the bottom tier teams in Denver and Carolina, specifically Denver when they were not a cohesive team and they were not playing up to their potential or their expectations. So those were a little unimpressive, but the 1-goal loss to Utah, like, that was like we said, that was a phenomenal game. California showed that they can play with the best of them. Ultimately, I do think that they're going to be definitely a top 5 team come the end of this year. I think, like, their inexperience is definitely going to catch up to them a little bit, but right now I think having them at 3, fits perfectly. And they've got 2 good matchups against Denver and Philly this weekend. Specifically the Denver game, I think, is going to be really fun to watch. But 4, we have the New York Atlas at 2-2. This team literally goes from, I think, the undisputed best team in the league to, like, a bottom 4 team week in and week out. I don't know. You don't know what you're getting. Like I said, I think they're the most talented team in the league. I think if you just look on paper at the rosters, this team is a championship pick for sure. They've obviously, like, their first 3 games were pretty bad, but they've had flashes of greatness where you see, like, you see the same brand of lacrosse that they played last year when they were the number 1 team coming out of the regular season. And it looked like this week, they're finally in their 4th game. It looked like they finally put it all together with their domination in Philly. I have them at 4 right now, even though last week they looked number 1. But I have them at 4 just because of the first couple weeks. Who knows? Next week they could go suck. Like, I don't know. We need to see this team perform for a couple weeks in a row for them to be able to really move up past this spot. And they like we said, they play Utah this weekend, so that's a great chance to do so. 5, we have Denver Outlaws. They're 2-2, back-to-back wins against Philly and Utah. I really think this team is just going to slowly continue to climb these rankings as their talent gets more and more cohesive. They're up there probably top. If I say New York is the most talented team in the league, I'd probably say Denver is 2 or 3 right there. I mean, their offense is probably the second most talented offense. Arguably the first, but I'd probably say second most talented offense behind New York. But I think overall they're definitely top 3 in terms of just, if you look at the rosters on the paper, how much talent do these teams have? How good should they be? They got that Utah win this week, which they needed desperately for their Western Conference standings. But I think this team has a really bright future. So I think they're just going to keep climbing up from 5. I really don't see them dropping much below that. At number 6, we have Philly at 2-2. 2 losses in a row in bad fashion. Like, not too impressive. Obviously, we had them at 1 last week, so this is a really big drop off for them. like in their 2 losses, one to Denver, one to New York. Obviously, the Denver one was pretty underwhelming. I don't think either team really deserved to win that game. It felt like Philly was, after beating the Cannons, who were, I thought were the best team in the league at the time too. They felt like complacent almost. They felt tired. They just didn't bring the energy, and I know it's different because they can't prepare the whole week the same. So I kind of shrugged that one off. But then they went out to New York, and it was another underwhelming performance. So, I mean, 2 games in a row like that, they definitely are going to drop. This team at their peak looked great. I don't know if they just really got the best of their week 1 bye and jumping on the scene relatively unknown and with total energy. But we'll see. I think this team has the ability to put it together. I don't think they're going to end up being. I'd be surprised if this team ends up making it too far in terms of being like a championship contender, to be totally honest. But I think this ultimately is a top 4 or 5 team in the league. I was listening to the Mitchell Pelkey Lacrosse show earlier today, and they were having the debate about the Sowers MVP convo. Is he still? I mean, I know after week 2 or week 3, week 2 or 3, whatever, I don't even know. But after week 2 or 3, he was a clear MVP favorite. Is he still now? A lot of guys were arguing for TJ Malone. I think Sowers still clearly has to be the number 1 favorite for MVP. If you look at you're comparing him and TJ Malone, they're 2 of the best players in the league offensively. Sowers has had I feel like he's just more of a dominant presence, honestly. When you think of an MVP, I think of Nikola Jokic in the NBA, putting up absolutely ridiculous stats. The ball finds its way to him. In his MVP season, it felt like the ball found its way to him every single possession, and he was initiating and finishing plays every single. He was involved in every scoring play. It felt like, and that's exactly what it feels like with Sowers. I don't know if it feels like that with Malone. I don't know if it should feel like that with Malone. I don't know if that's a characteristic of a championship team is having somebody who needs to be involved in everything. But I definitely think Sowers still needs to be the favorite in that MVP combo. And then at 7, we have Maryland Whipsnakes at 2 and 3. They had a fake close game against the Cannons. That was not a close game. They got some garbage time goals at the end there. It really didn't feel like they were in it. They had a chance at the very end to tie the game up, but that was a fake 1-goal game. The Cannons outplayed them by 4 or 5 goals for sure. And then obviously their performance against the Chaos, I think it was 26 or something. I've never seen a 20-goal game that I can remember in the PLL. So, I mean, impressive, sure. That Chaos team looked terrible. I think that speaks more to how poor the Chaos played and how low their floor is than how good the Whipsnakes are. I'm not too impressed with this Snakes team, to be honest. I know 7 is probably lower than a lot of other people might have them, but I don't know. I'm just not impressed. I absolutely love TJ Malone and Dane Carroll, though. I think, those guys are 2 future, faces of the league, 2 future consistent all-stars. But yeah, I don't know. Now they've got a bye week. They're not going to play for 3 weeks now because they've got, this whole week, and they have the All-Star week and then the week leading up to what would that be, week 6. So yeah, I mean, it's going to end up being a 20 day break for them. I hope that they can kind of try to iron out some of their roster issues. I think last game made it a little easier for them with Levi putting up 5 goals. He was an absolute stud. I think that he definitely made that decision a little easier for Stags after that performance. But last team in the league, number 8, we have Carolina Chaos at 1 and 3. They have potential to not finish 8th in the league, but it would take Nobby and Hiltz to really start buzzing if they're. I mean, so you look at that 20-goal game with the Whipsnakes last week, and this defense was up there this was probably a top 3 defense in the league after that performance. I mean, they need this defense to be a top 2 defense in the league if they want a shot to not finish last. And, the defense we saw last weekend was far from top 2 defense in the league, even though that they kind of looked that part the first couple weeks. But it's really all they got right now. So they got to ride their defense and give their offense time to really gel because there's a lot of new faces in there. Almost entirely new faces in there. But, we'll see. Next week, some of the matchups. Boston's playing Carolina, which I don't think I need to explain much. I think the Cannons are going to win that one. It's the number 1 team versus the number 8 team. And then we have the Utah and New York game I talked about a little bit. Honestly, I think New York is going to take this. Like, they're so inconsistent and so hard to predict. But I think New York is going to be able to win this one. I was calling for the emergence of their midfield last week, and we finally saw it. They changed up. They sat Jones, which most people I don't think would have the balls to do. And then they sat Kyle Jackson, who is one of my personal favorite NLL and PLL players right now. Which honestly, it looked like it paid off. They had great performances all over the field, but particularly, I think the emergence of their midfield is what separated them. And let's see. I want to look at some of these stats. Yeah. So out of the box score last week in their massive win against Philly, they had Brian Costabile, who, like I said, might be the best midfielder in the league. I think it's him and Matt Campbell, but right now Costabile probably has the edge on him. He had 2 1-point goals and 2 2-point goals. Insane. They had Reed Bowering come in and just play his role perfectly. He was a two-man pair. He was an off-ball guy, 2 goals, 1 assist. I think he is honestly a missing piece of what they needed in terms of being able to play that off-ball and that picker role well and really not trying to overcarry and do more than they need him to, because his offense is so incredibly skilled. And they had Matt Trainer with 3 assists. Him emerging as a feeder is just so cool to see. But I don't know. I'm buying the stock on this New York Atlas team. I think they're going to pull the upset off against Utah this week, particularly because I think they figured out some of their offensive woes. I think if their midfield can show up like they did, I expect them to sit the same guys again and see if they can do it again. And I think that they're going to do well. I also think the Dobson injury, he's clearly in pain still. He doesn't look like the Dobson we're used to seeing. I think that's going to play a factor too. But next game, we've got California. It's their homecoming. They play Denver and Philly. California versus Denver. I think Denver is going to get the win here, honestly. I think this is one of the worst matchups for Cali. It just feels like Denver, obviously, like they make a living on transition. And we talk about the talent on that team. I think Denver is a little more talented than California. And I think this game with both of these two teams, I think it's going to be a really up and down game. It's going to be fun to watch. But ultimately, I think Denver is going to end up, persevering in that transition game. And I think McEnany I'm all over McEnany. I love McEnany. I think he's going to eat up some of California's shots. California, so I've said this before, I think Denver's shot selection is pretty poor. I think it's the worst in the league probably. But bottom of the league as well as California, honestly. I think they take a lot of like similar to Denver, not quite as bad, but I think they take a lot of one-on-one dodging, a lot of those tougher shots on the run, and I think McEnany, those are the shots he eats up. I haven't seen McEnany miss a save he should have had in a while. So I think Denver's going to take the win on that one. And then in their second game, they play Philly, and I think Cali's going to win this one. I think, I honestly, there's not too much reasoning in this other than Philly seems cold, and my gut is telling me California is going to win a game in their homecoming. I went to the San Diego games last year because I was playing box out there, and the crowd was awesome, dude. Torero Stadium was essentially sold out. So I think that this is going to be a fun homecoming weekend. I loved the emergence of lacrosse in California, specifically in the Bay Area and then in the San Diego area, is off the charts. And I think that this is going to be a good home field advantage. I think they're going to be able to take one against Philly. It'd be 1-1 in their homecoming weekend. And was that all four? That was all four games, I believe. We had Boston beating Carolina, we had New York beating Utah, and then we had Denver beating California and California beating Philly. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about just engagement with the PLL as a whole. I think I was a little concerned watching the Baltimore games this weekend. I thought this last year too, but this year it really, came to my attention a bit more. Obviously they're playing in Baltimore. It's the Lacrosse state. It's like it's the hot spot. It's that in Long Island, right? And they play at Homewood Field, which is, that and the Dome are probably the two most influential or famous fields in the sport, I think, with a ton of history. And I was a little disappointed with the crowd size. I don't know. What troubles me is you see a lot of, I watch a lot of NLL as well, and I love both the indoor game and the outdoor game. But you see, the crowd size in a place like Baltimore that's supposed to be the hub of field lacrosse, in none of the games were sold out. I wish they posted attendance numbers like the NLL teams do. I'd be so curious to see that, but I don't know. Is it worrying? A little bit, honestly. Why can NLL teams in Buffalo and Calgary and Colorado pull, these massive crowds, but then field lacrosse in its home in Baltimore feels like it can't. I don't understand it, but I think, honestly, it feels concerning, but I think it just is it's just another reason why I think that the Ravens need to sell the teams. I think they have to sell the teams into franchises. That's the only way you're going to if you sell these teams into franchises, give them home games, give them away games like a normal league. I think the league is ready for that. I think they'll be able, the whole point of selling it into a franchise is that you get this investment from somebody in the community that cares about the team. There's some Baltimore lacrosse guys, someone from Baltimore is going to buy this team. They're going to, care about Baltimore. They're going to care about the team. They're going to put money and they're going to put time and energy into selling tickets for this team and creating a whole environment around the Maryland Whipsnakes. And that's the way you create fandom. I don't think what they're doing right now is doing enough to create fandom, and I don't think it's doing enough. They're doing enough to sell tickets either. Another interesting thing, I'll throw up the graphic right here, but Quick Stick blog on Twitter. Through 4 weeks, the PLL is averaging 267,000 viewers per game. This past weekend added 3 more TV games to the average. The Archers Outlaws game on ABC averaged over 400,000 viewers, which was the most viewed game this season. And compared to the first couple weeks of 2024, viewership is down 3.5%. When you look at these numbers, obviously it's great news. The over that's a shit ton of people. Over 400,000 people watching the Archers Outlaws game is awesome. A little bit of an anomaly, it looks like, on ESPN. I mean, it depends on the network. Obviously ESPN2 is not going to get the pull that ESPN and ABC do, but 25,000 people watching Boston, Maryland is a little concerning, considering that those are, two of the bigger names in the sport. Obviously, the Boston Cannons have been around forever, even though obviously it's a different franchise now, but it's the same name brand. They have, when you go to the Cannons game, you see probably more people in Cannons uniforms than you do in any other homecoming uniform in other places, and that's just because of how long the Cannons have been here and how they do have a fandom here because they had an owner who owned the team here and created a fandom around it in the MLL era. But I don't know. I'm not too concerned about the drop in viewership yet. I think obviously the ESPN and the ESPN2 game bring the average down a lot. But I just having over 400,000 people watching a lacrosse game this weekend is so exciting. So I think the TV ratings don't trouble me at all, even though technically they're down a couple of percentages. What's really interesting though is the new ESPN media deal. Obviously, what was a disaster was when the PLL was first with NBC and Peacock, because who the hell that was before most of like 2019, 2020, 2021, I think were the 3 seasons that they were on Peacock. And that was like before the stream. It felt like that was right before the streaming area, before you had like NFL moving to like YouTube TV and Amazon Prime and stuff like that. So at that point, I remember being like, who the hell is going to watch this on Peacock? And as somebody who loves lacrosse, like I didn't have Peacock. I was like, I had no idea what was going on. I signed into like one of my friend's Peacock accounts to watch some of those games. And it was just, the production was just completely different. The production of this ESPN crew is absolutely awesome, and I love it, and I think it's huge for the sport. And now with this new extension, I absolutely love it. I think it's big. Obviously the valuation in the dollar amount associated with this hasn't been announced. It's unknown. But obviously, the really interesting twist to this is that the ESPN actually invested in the PLL. They bought 3% of the league. Which I go back and forth on an issue. I was like, that's awesome, because you have this, you have both sides of it. It's awesome because you have ESPN investing in something that they're promoting, so they have an incentive to push it out there and to put money into production and provide the best product as possible, because the PLL, viewership in the PLL goes up. ESPN will make more money off of them having invested in the league. But then on the other side, you have this weird dynamic where what's the relationship between the PLL and ESPN? It feels like, I think as a fan of lacrosse, I want the PLL to be on ESPN all the time. I think it's the most accessible and it's the most popular way to watch sports. But what if that changes in a couple of years and the PLL has this relationship with ESPN because ESPN owns 3% of the league and they don't want to break away from that? I don't know. It just feels like an interesting. I don't know of any other streaming service or that has that much, is intertwined with one of their products like that. I could be totally wrong, but I don't know. That just came into my mind. I think ultimately, it's a good thing though. I think overall it provides stability for the league, knowing that ESPN's going to care about how the PLL does and they want the PLL to succeed, which is great. What was a little troubling is you have these. I'll try to throw up another one of the screenshots from some of the tweets, but you see these. A lot of people are tweeting about, Rabel hinting at, starting of trying to make this league provide enough money for the players that they can live and market. They can really focus on this and be their real sole employment, which obviously is a huge goal, and that's like ultimately where we want to get to. What I have trouble with though is Paul talked about starting the season earlier and ending before the NFL season, trying to add more games to the schedule so they can make more money, get more money to the players, which sounds great. The problem is the NLL stuff. It's NLL and it's the college stuff, because right now the PLL starts a week after the college season, but that doesn't trouble me too much, because you see like a league like the NHL, for example, where guys finish college and they jump right into the NHL for the end of the NHL season. Some of the top prospects do that. And if not, you just wait till the next year. It's not a big deal. Like NFL, obviously, they're playing the same season. There's a huge time span before they have to suit up in an NFL uniform. So I don't think the college thing's a huge deal. The huge deal is the NLL though, because a lot of these players that play in both leagues, there's a ton of them. Obviously, I think there's I remember seeing something about it. I think there's 50 or 60, 50 to 70 of them, I think, that play in both leagues, and that's like, if you hurt their ability to play in one or the other, even though you're trying to provide more money for the PLL players, you're taking money away from the guys who play in both leagues, which is like a third of the league. So, because if they're playing, say they play for whatever it is, like 15 weeks in the NLL and then 10 weeks in the PLL back to back, if all of a sudden you cut into those NLL games, they have to choose one or the other. And obviously, because it's the end of the NLL season, they're probably going to choose NLL. They're not getting paid. They're losing. They're not getting paid from both. You only get paid on a week where you play in the PLL. So you're just cutting off games at the end of the season, at the end of the PLL season that they would be playing in if you shorten it and cut it into the NLL season. So I really hope they don't do that. I hope that we can try to find another way to do it. The ideal scenario would be that the NLL and PLL can work together. It feels like there's some weird bad blood there. Obviously, they're somewhat competitors, but ultimately, like we're both playing lacrosse, I guess, in the PLL and the NLL, and having the opportunity to play in both leagues makes lacrosse as a profession a much more attractive venture with a lot more opportunities to make money. So I just hope that the leagues can not directly compete with each other. Like I hated back when they used to a little bit, and I couldn't see. You'd see the Chaos lose like their first 4 or 5 games because it wouldn't have half their players. Like that sucked to see, and I really hope that we don't have to do that again. All right, last up, we got Rochester NLL news. Obviously, this was for those of you who may not have heard, Rochester Nighthawks. The owners stepped away from the team, and the league's trying to find new owners, but we're getting pretty close to, we're halfway through the summer at this point. It's pretty late for this to be happening. It doesn't look great in terms of finding owners. I know they've been trying to sell the team for a while, so unfortunately, it looks like Rochester might be closing its doors for at least the near future, which is really disappointing. It's obviously one of the most storied franchises in the league. It just sucks to see. There's nothing really more to say. You had Panther City last year fold. If Rochester this year folds, it's a terrible look for the league. And it's also kind of bizarre because you see every year in the NLL season, you see these stats that I'll throw up a couple of the stats, a couple of the tweets I've been seeing, but the finals this year were the most viewed finals in NLL history. So 300,000+ people tuning in to Game 3 of the finals. It's the most watched game the NLL's had. That's spectacular news, and it sucks that you have something like that, and then you have this one where the Buffalo Bandits had a higher local TV ratings for the NLL finals than the Florida Panthers had for the Stanley Cup finals. That's absolutely insane, and it sucks that you can have two stats like that come up at the same time. You have back-to-back years where teams are folding. It's kind of bizarre, and it sucks a little bit. But I think, going back to bet, I'm literally begging the Rabels to sell the teams into franchises now for the PLL, because you don't get stats like these with centralized ownership in sports. You get stats like these because teams have been in their markets for quite a few years, and they build a fan base, they build relationships in their communities, and people care and people tune in because they want to see a team with Buffalo across their chest go win a championship. So the PLL, I don't think ultimately will have any cool stats like this until they sell the teams, which I hope they do soon enough. But some exciting news from LaxRatsTV. Spotify's up now for all podcast episodes, so catch the Rat Chats there, catch the State of Laxes there. And coming soon, website and a weekly blog. Planning to do more of the PLL matchup breakdowns and stuff of that nature on the blog. So tune in for that, and thank you for watching episode 1 of State of Lax, and we'll catch you soon.